So, first of all, Avi, I'm so thrilled to have you here and to have this conversation with you.
Thank you.
No, really, and it was really beautiful for me to receive your email after having witnessed my show. It really moved me. Uh, and I think the first theme that I want to talk about when we talk about Eros and we talk about sensuality and we talk about the deep feminine is really this the quality of witnessing. And the performance itself draws a lot from authentic movement, which is a practice of a mover and witness. And the idea of authentic movement is really how do you refine your own inner witness.
Right.
And very, very often in my own meditation practices or when I drop into the body, one of the images that I see is the eye. And there's something about really seeing a close-up of the eye. I think it really is about intimacy. And
Right.
intimacy is like a huge theme in my work, definitely now, but even as I was looking back over the years, I think this intimacy and that connection and really seeing someone for who they are and keeping myself out of it, like really being here to see who you are, to see you, and keeping myself out of it is really for me the greatest act of love.
Right.
So I wanted to kind of talk about, because I know that in your work there are a lot of images of the eye,
Right.
and they're so beautiful and so powerful, and I was kind of curious to hear your side of it.
Right. I think for me, this thing of being a witness is two ways. One is you are witness, or I am witness to something, and the other aspect is that I feel like I'm being watched.
Mm-hmm.
So also this aspect of saying I'm being watched is my own projection. So it's in some way it's also my own watching.
Yeah.
So so this feeling that of being witness to something big or something large has been there for a long time for me across my various hallucinations and visions, and there's always this constant idea of being witness to something that's bigger than myself. And and there's also been an aspect of being watched, of being constantly, it was like a critical eye that I had a vision of who I was, and this eye kind of shook it up a bit, saying, look, there are all these other aspects of yourself that you've just not been aware of, or you just ignored. They've been like blind spots that you don't see.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of made me aware of these aspects of myself which I had ignored or chose not to see, rather.
Yeah. I think that's just so beautiful, because when we are practicing authentic movement, and one of the things we all realize is that initial encounter with the inner witness is very often critical.
Right.
Because that's how we're kind of trained to see ourselves, or if there is something from the outside that we are aspiring towards, anything else becomes not enough, not good enough.
Right.
So when you say this thing of being watched, it's one of the reasons why people find it difficult to look within.
Right.
Because I can be critical, but it is that same eye that also can create space and expansiveness to hold
Right.
all the sides of you.
Right.
And when that happens, I think it's, like I said, an act of love.
Right.
And I know that you will always tell me it's tough love.
I feel like it is with love, because otherwise there was no reason to have done it in the first place. It's like there's no need to point out things to yourself if there's no love.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was always with care, and it was always with care, but a kind of tough care, saying, look, these are aspects of yourself that you have not seen, and and not saying you should do anything about it, but just I think bringing it up,
being willing to see it.
being willing to see it, I think is.
And however the seeing happens, I think it's still seeing.
Yeah.
And I want to say that's why for me the email that you wrote to me really moved me.
Okay.
Because you were witnessing my performance, but the email was really witnessing your journey.
Right. Right.
And
yeah, I think your performance brought up a lot of things in about my own journey, and I think like the dreams that you were talking about, they all seemed to. It was almost like an aspect of you was talking to me, and which is why I felt like I really should communicate. I could have easily not said anything and just left it, but I thought I should make an effort and
and
communicate.
It moved me deeply, because while it is a very personal story, I think and I hope that points of it I really am able to drop into a depth that is kind of universal for all of us. That we are sharing the same experience. So to have received that was it really also validated for me this work and why it's I don't know, just almost like that's the reality. It is a reality that we all actually, and I think this thing of coming into the feminine eros or the deep feminine, I think it's a reality and it's a pulse that we all have access to. And I would be curious to hear more of what you have to say around that.
I feel like in my own experience, what happened was that it was through digital. It was all mediated through digital media or through communication. And if I'd receive an email or if I'd receive an SMS or a WhatsApp message, I always felt like that was the female or the feminine that was feeding that message. I always felt like it was. I know this entire thing is a spectrum, but for me, it's still quite binary. I feel like I'm very much masculine, and there is a very feminine aspect that's in opposition or in binary to what I am. There might be. It might be a very not a clear-cut binary, but I still feel there is a kind of a binary. This is my personal experience. I'm not saying this is how it is for everybody, but I always felt like my feedback that I got was always through the feminine, and it was always talking about the feminine, and it was always like a feminine point of view, which was kind of in opposition to my conditioning or my upbringing as a man, and and I've also in my life I've also had I've also always dealt with women as my bosses, or as most people I've dealt with professionally have always been women. I've never actually. A very very small percentage of the people I deal with professionally are men. So I feel like I had access to that kind. How do I explain this? That it was something that I felt was. How can I say this? Okay, I'm not sure, but okay. Anyway.
Okay, I would agree about the opposites. That wherever we are on that spectrum, there is an opposite that we are constellating. And very often, it's an opposite that's repressed or we don't actually see. And I think in your case, you feel the more feminine aspects. So I think, so we can be holding different levels of masculine, feminine, I won't say traits, but principles. And there is the opposite that we hope and I think in your case, your art has forced you to create space for.
Right.
And then I feel like there's something called the deep feminine, that is that space that exists beyond that polarity even.
Right.
You know, that pulse of life that
Right.
that kind of seeps through every creation.
Right.
Art, you know, it just speaks.
Right.
And yeah, and I think, I mean, I would absolutely agree with you that accessing that is tough love. Because
Right.
there's no pretense. You can't be anything except who you are, and there's a kind of stripping away everything that lacks integrity or is not
Right.
authentic to who you are.
Right, and you're also put in a very vulnerable position.
Yeah. Because it's all powerful and all encompassing.
Right. I felt like in my experience that I was able to witness something that was so big that it could speak through anybody. And it was not that each person was a separate individual, but like all the pieces were connecting from something that was much deeper, which relates to what you were saying of the deep feminine being like beyond polarity.
Yeah, almost beyond something that, because we are so conditioned and living in this patriarchal paradigm that we almost, there's no space for it, and we don't know how to define it, and we don't, but yet we can feel it, you know.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, there was something that you said. I think this thing, the other thing, at least for me, I think it's been research over 10 years. It's very much been a personal story, but you know, and slowly slipping into a deeper kind of collective thing. But each time that happened, it was absolutely terrifying.
Right.
I remember there were moments I would think like these movements would come up, and I would be so terrified that I was going to get possessed.
Oh gosh. Okay.
You know, I'd be like, because it's just it's like something else speaking through you.
Right.
And I wonder if that experience is a little bit to what you're talking about when you say I witnessed something greater than myself.
Right. See, I feel like if I can take an example of two artists, I feel like in one case it was through the body and something that they could access, and I feel like the other way of doing it is not necessarily through the body, but it's through a mirror image. So you witness this not directly within yourself, but through a mirror image. So you see the reflection of that outside. So I feel like that's not necessarily, I mean, that's a more perhaps intellectual understanding, and I feel like I feel like I experienced it through a mirror. I felt like everything was reflecting myself back at me, and although I did have experiences directly through my body, which were real to me, and I think that was the reason I was able to believe or trust that these mirror images are real. Yeah. It was because something else that I experienced through my body was real. Now there's
You can't deny
I can't deny that. Yeah. And it's just I've never been able to through all my. I mean, I've asked doctors, I've asked psychologists, but nobody's able to explain it, and I've just left it at that. So, But
I really think there's something very. I know that you've moved here intuitively about knowing that you can trust the body because your heart is beating faster. It's real.
Right.
Your stomach is churning. Is real. So I feel that grounding the images and the visions into a somatic experience.
Right.
and you start with the somatic experience and allow that to move into even images. I mean, of course, emotion, but yeah, and that is the reality of it, right? And that makes it very true and have a level of integrity to who you are.
Right.
That something else could just be an intellectual
Right.
conversation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't mean intellectual conversation necessarily in that sense. I meant it's more. I mean, once this bodily experience has been had, I can witness this through my mind. If I feel like that gave me the permission to witness this through my mind. I mean, although I mean, in my mental health journey, so that's also been a physical thing of like purely chemicals changing. I feel like what one can consider an illness is in some sense also it's just some short circuit that allows you to witness that gives you access to something else that under normal circumstances you don't have access to. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that it's a different thing, and it needs to be dealt with in a way that's productive. My doctor always told me that as long as you're well, it's fine. As long as you're not feeling it as a pressure or getting overwhelmed by it, it's fine that these things exist. Yeah.
But it requires like tremendous amount of courage to hold an experience that is not validated by.
I feel like my bodily experience was was the thing that said, yes, what you're seeing is real and what you're witnessing is real. And it was a constant battle with everybody around saying, you're hallucinating, none of this exists. Anyway, I feel like it lived out its journey. It started with a shooting up of going really high and then slowly coming down, and that coming down was the critical part of I think the first part was a completely getting out of the system, and the second part of it was like seeing what has come out, being witnessing what
all
has
the pieces
that have come out. It was a strange journey anyway. Yeah.
And how many years do you think?
This entire thing has gone on. Has taken me like almost 25 years now. It started when I was in my mid 20s or late 20s, and now I'm 50 now. So almost 25 years. It's been quite a journey.
It's quite an experience.
It
probably needs lifetimes to even hold, and because there's so much that's
right.
But that's something I also see in your art. Like there's so much even in one image.
Right.
There's so many openings, so many stories.
Right.
And you also chose like different medium, and it really it feels like I get a sense of a lot. So one of the things, there are two more things, Avi, that I really want to hear from you. One is about dreams, and maybe we can start with that. And so just tell me what has been your relationship with your dreams?
Right.
How do they impact you? How do you engage with it? Do you interact with it? Does it find a way into your art?
Right. I think like I had dreams in deep sleep early on in my journey, and I feel like that has by itself stopped. So I feel like dreams that come in really deep sleep that come at around 2-3 in the morning, when you're really out of it, are much more vivid, are much stronger. You remember them, and I feel like they come from a space that's not necessarily belonging only to you. I feel like they come from a space that's more universal, and that you are a witness at that particular moment. And I feel like this space has a life of its own that it controls. I feel like it determines when you see these dreams and when you don't see these dreams. I was also reminded of something that I read somewhere, where these tribes in Africa were saying that we've lost access to these dreams because with technology and everything, we just don't rely on them anymore, and that these dreams have stopped. And I feel like for me it's been a kind of a similar experience, where I had these dreams for a brief period and then they just stopped. Yeah.
You miss them?
I miss them. I miss them quite a lot, actually. I feel like I felt like I belonged to something bigger, but it's fine. It's okay. And I think I had read somewhere that in some cultures, when they dream of something in deep sleep, they go looking for it in real life, in waking life. And I took that to heart, and when I had these dreams, I went looking for them in waking life. And I think that kind of structured my journey in terms of how I see things. I had a dream of seeing an entire forest that was just one tree, and that kind of structured the way I witnessed things, where everything I felt was connected deep down as from one source. And so I've structured things from my dreams, and I think more lately I haven't paid too much attention to my dreams, because I feel like they're more fleeting and they're more like defragmentation of daily life than they are of anything very dramatically big.
Yeah, I mean, dreams hugely inform my process.
Right.
I also go looking for them. In fact, I went to Ethiopia because I dreamt of a church in Ethiopia.
Wow.
4 times.
Okay.
And I didn't know that it was in Ethiopia.
Okay.
But at some point, I typed it in. Like, I saw this church in the cave, and with paintings on the ceiling.
Okay.
And it was set in Ethiopia, and I had a friend who lived in Ethiopia, so I kind of made that trip.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was amazing because I had a friend, I kind of spent a lot of time with them, and the last day of my trip, I went to this church. I mean, I'd done a 4-day trip on my own.
Okay.
And I went to this church, and I saw it was like high up, and I'm terrified of heights.
Right.
But somehow managed to go up because I'd already seen it in the dream.
Right.
I'd seen myself enter, so
wow,
I
that's
knew
dramatic.
that I would do it. Like, for some reason there was no fear, because otherwise I'm terrified. And I remember seeing the ceiling, and I just lay on that floor, and I just couldn't stop crying.
Wow.
And I couldn't. I don't logically know what happened.
Right.
But I just know that there was that connection between the Eros and the spirit. In
right.
that moment,
Right.
And it made sense to me, I think, not intellectually, I still can't, but something about going after it, following it,
Right.
and it being a space of spirit, because it was really high up.
Right.
But in this very rugged, like it was a cave, so so
right.
you feel the matter, and then these artwork of, I think it was the disciples, but there was also a figure of Saint Thomas,
Okay.
who is the patron saint in Ethiopia,
Right.
but is also the same who came down to Kerala and started Christianity.
Right.
It just felt like something had
Good.
clicked, and
Right.
I come from that community.
Okay.
Not at all interested in religion or any
Right.
of that, but something clicked, and I remember just weeping. So when you say this, going out and searching for it in your waking life, I think this, I don't know whether whether you need to actually do it, but I think the act of giving it that much importance
Right.
shifts something within you,
Right.
and reveals something for you. I think, yeah.
Right.
And the other thing I want to ask you about dreams, and because again in your work about this, when you portray snakes, does
Right.
that hold anything?
I mean, I'm in real life. I'm terrified of snakes.
Me too.
But I feel like there is this aspect that snakes slither on magnetic fields, and there's something about, especially big snakes. There's something definitely erotic about that, and I feel yeah, and I think it's shown up not only in my dreams but also people's dreams nearby, which has informed my own journey. And yeah, and I think snakes also somehow to me represent the unknown, and yeah.
I mean, symbolically, there's a lot that the snake carries.
Right.
Yeah, but it's definitely the symbol of like energy and power.
Right.
It's like really low, right?
Right.
Suppressed and
Right.
And I think eroticism and sensuality.
In the slithers.
Yeah, that slithering movement of
yeah.
a snake going around a tree.
Right.
You can almost feel the bark of the tree against the,
Right.
there's something very alive and in
Right.
that experience. Yeah, I was just curious to hear your side. Okay, I'm going to come back. I know we've spoken about it in a few things, but this thing when you say all of this is rooted in something deeply erotic and spiritual,
Right.
I'm just wanting to hear your thoughts.
Okay. Now, I don't have any explanation for why I think it's erotic. I just felt that it's. I think the spiritual is deeply erotic. I feel like that's the only way I have accessed it. I don't necessarily follow religion I'm not religious.
Right.
I would consider myself more spiritual, and I think that they're two different things. One is on how society has structured it, and one is a very personal experience or personal access to it. And I think the spiritual in a very personal way is necessarily erotic. And I'm not sure why I say this, or I don't have any. I felt like it constantly reflected back my own. I won't say defects, but I would say like things about myself that were rooted in my masculine sexual self. And although that is a very superficial thing, I felt like something for something to address that had to be from a much deeper, more erotic base. You can't how do you say, you can't be critical of that unless it comes from something deeper. Yeah, and yeah, I think I addressed a lot of my own conditioning through that, my own sexual conditioning through that.
So I think it's deeply erotic and deeply spiritual, but my journey started with the Eros, it was about desire.
Okay.
And then it led me to the spirit. I think the spiritual aspect of it. But my sense with you is you're speaking about it maybe from the other way. It's you're from the spiritual
yeah,
to the erotic.
I think mine was the other way around.
Yeah.
Certainly. I think it started off with something spiritual, and then it manifested itself in an erotic way. Yeah, but my goal or my point of view to reach was always a spiritual. Yeah, which I've sobered out a lot on. But
So I can say I've sobered out on the desire. For me, it was really desire and the eros, and that now it's led me to the spiritual aspect. And I think love,
Right.
love for me is
Right.
it's kind of this. But the other thing that was interesting for me so this performance happened, but before that was a short film.
Okay.
And two men in my life that I was close to, and still am. Both of them, the first look at the film was like, oh my god, it's like a horror film.
Oh gosh.
And the other one
Okay.
was like, oh, it's like all the makings of a zombie movie. And it was interesting because I realized like their perception of what I was working on desire and Eros was something completely different. Whereas
Right.
my journey was actually, and it's true, it's terrifying.
Right.
It's terrifying to make that descent. I think it's terrifying for people to view someone making that descent.
Right.
Because it confronts everything else, right?
Right.
The world that we're so carefully kind of living in, that gets shaken so, and it's terrifying, and we don't
Right.
want. So we would like it to be in that space of belly dancing and
Right.
you know, that I don't know, but yeah, that's what I.
And now I'm curious to see the film.
No, the film is actually come see it. It's 16 minutes. It's,
Okay.
But I think it was the first product that was out. It was before the show.
Okay.
The show also reminds me of someone. The other day, someone came. He's like, "Oh, don't be scared." And it's so interesting for me, and then it also makes perfect sense because I do think witnessing someone have agency around their desire is actually terrifying.
Right.
It shakes up everything.
Right.
And while we'd like to believe, oh, that's beautiful, and it's not the love is all around, free, it's not that
Right.
kind of hippie. It
Right.
doesn't stay in that flowers. And,
Right. No,
things,
completely, I
trees,
agree.
Yeah.
I think Eros is a very frightening, can be very frightening and very powerful.
Yeah, and I think it's so powerful. And I think this thing of really allowing us kind of surrender, right? Because you're not anymore calling the shots.
Right.
There's
Yeah, I think in my journey at some point I was like, it was a contest between fate and free will, and I felt like I'd chosen the side of fate, and I was like, whatever happens is fine. I surrender.
Yeah.
It was like I leave it to that. I trust this thing that's bigger than me, and I leave it to that. Yeah. I think that was a big part of my journey where I was like,
Yeah.
we see what happens. You have to trust it unconditionally. That's
Yeah.
the scary part,
Yeah.
because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. And I hope, I don't know, but I think what I'm kind of trying to find is how do we, is this dance between complete surrender where it has its way with you,
Right.
and a kind of more engaged interaction.
Right.
But I think those moments of complete surrender, they have to happen.
Right.
Without that, you're not.
Right. I think there is an engagement in the surrender.
Yeah.
You do participate. It's
Yeah.
not like you're not participating, but there is also a letting go of you don't know what's going to happen, and there's a trust in something bigger, and I think that's been important for me.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
There's no other way, I think.
Yeah.
There's something else when you were speaking about Eros and spirituality, and you said there's something very erotic, and even though you came from it from a spiritual kind of questioning or leaning or inquiry, I think the Eros aspect has to do with being alive, right? Like when you're on this quest, you're completely kind of alive and awake.
Right.
In many ways, and that is kind of almost always erotic, right?
Right.
To be alive is a form of
Right.
eros, which then I feel why this work is so important, or to, when you spoke about the people in Africa saying we don't get the dreams anymore because it's been
right.
replaced by technology. It's almost like a numbing down and creating more barriers between ourselves and our own innate knowing,
right.
So when you're on that quest and you're connected, you're completely open and available and present and alive, and I mean that is Eros. And
right.
I mean, at least for me it was that desire.
Right.
Was, I mean,
I wouldn't equate desire completely with I think Eros is bigger than desire.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
But my way was through.
Right.
Entry was desire.
Right. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
thank
Ali.
you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.